And now, speaking of things that are hard to stick with and they just feel like you want to give up on, we are now on the fifth sermon from John chapter 6. But it's here, it's the last one. And I think it has been all worth it. But there is one thing that I wanted to do in the lectionary, which, if you don't know the history of the lectionary, that's where we have our readings. This version was developed somewhere in the 90s, but it goes back further than that. It's kind of how we choose which readings we're going to have each week. But this reading I found was very interesting because we do all of John chapter 6, and then we leave out the last two verses. 69 verses of one chapter, but they leave out the last two, and I said enough of it, and so I'm going to continue with the next two verses, because I feel they're important to this passage. And so beginning with verse 70, Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil." He was speaking of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, for he, though one of the 12, was going to betray him. It adds so much more suspense to this chapter. How did they not add it in? But when we think over this large chapter of John 6, and for those who have not been with us for the last few weeks, I'll give a brief recap of the highlights. It began with the feeding of the 5,000, but how the times have changed so quickly since then. See, there the crowd was so excited. They were filled up physically, they were filled up spiritually, from this encounter with Jesus and this meal of fish and loaves, this miracle that fed them. And as the chapter continued, they followed after Jesus. They went to Capernaum. They wanted to continue getting some great food, so they asked Jesus, "Can you do this one again? Give us some more bread to eat." See, they wanted some food, but also this Jesus was doing things they had never seen before. And so they come to him, and then Jesus begins to teach them. And he says, "I am the true bread from heaven. Any other bread that you eat, if you want me to make you more bread right now, that will still lead to death. But if you eat a special bread, if you eat the bread that is my flesh, and if you drink the drink that is my blood, then you will have eternal life." And the crowd hears this, and they react poorly to it. They turn on him. They seem confused, angry, sickened even, at Jesus' fairly casual reference to eating and drinking him. And now, here in this final act of the chapter, we kind of see the fallout. We see what happens. Not only does the crowd leave, grumbling amongst themselves that Jesus had jumped the shark, that this guy was just full of it, he was crazy, but many of his own disciples, those who aren't the 12, abandon him. They couldn't wrap their head around his words of flesh and blood, and so they left. They stopped following after him. Now, there may have been any number of reasons for why they began to follow after Jesus. See, maybe it was the way that he spoke, the way that he taught, that it ignited something new in their hearts, something they had not heard before. Maybe they heard of his healings and had come to witness his miracles firsthand. Maybe they got a little taste of that wine in Cana. All number of reasons could have led to this. But these unnamed disciples came and gave their lives. They followed after him until this point. See, this teaching was too far. Jesus began to butt heads with their religious sensibilities. He began to butt heads with things that they could believe and handle. And they seemingly had to make a choice. Either follow the beliefs that we had or this very strange, very new teaching. And they quit. See, we talked a little bit last week when we met about the difficulty of the words in this passage. I mean, it is jarring to hear Jesus talk about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. There is no way around that. But in this passage particularly, if we stop there, if that is where we end, we miss what I think is the most important thing, that those who do this abide in Jesus. and Jesus abides in them. And this abiding, this dwelling in and with Jesus is so essential to understanding what this passage says. It is really, honestly, essential to understanding our faith. See, I asked the question last week, if we were there, would we too struggle with these words that Jesus spoke? And in the same way, I wonder if there are times that we still struggle today, that we still worry or we still stick more to our religion and to our beliefs than to what this character of Jesus calls us to do. Because at the heart of it, that's what these disciples did. They chose what they knew over what Jesus was offering them anew. Do we too prefer the safety of ritual and rule, the set structures, the same pews, the comfort of knowing the right words and of doing the right things? See, the beauty of religion is that it's something that we can control. And don't we just love control? We love being in control of our own lives, of taking our destiny into our own hands. We can set our own priorities. We can chase after our own dreams. We can live how we want and do as we will. And even when we talk about religion, we can still be in control. See, we can choose to be practicing, or maybe we're just testing the waters. We can choose to be orthodox. We can choose to be reformed. We can choose to be conservative or liberal in our religious understanding. There are more flavors of Christianity than flavors of ice cream at Baskin-Robbins. There are so many choices. But see, Jesus never calls us to abide within a religion. He never calls us to abide within Christianity. No, we are called to abide in him so that he can abide in us. See, if it's about the rules, it's all within our control. But if we take this call seriously, then to abide in Jesus is to find our rest in him. And to do that, we have to give up our control. See, there's a reason that disciple after disciple cannot make this commitment. There's a reason that Judas betrays him over to the religious authorities. If history has taught us anything, it is that humans, to a fault, do not like giving up our control. And frankly, that's what abiding requires. See, Jesus doesn't ask us to come and rest a while and then leave and go about our way when we feel like it. Abiding is to make a new home. Abiding is to cling to something as to life itself. To abide is to hold on permanently. And it's not too hard to understand why so many would want to leave. But there's also a reason why 12, maybe 11, honestly, chose to stay. See, when asked if they would leave too, Peter replies with what might be one of the best declarations of faith that we see in the Gospels. Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. Jesus and